I never expected that a broken air conditioner would change my life. But that's exactly what happened when the biggest heat wave in a decade hit the city. My life, up until that point, was a carefully curated sequence of routines. Predictable, safe, and, if I was being completely honest with myself, a little lonely. But sometimes, life has a way of turning up the temperature, forcing you out of your comfortable little box and into the path of someone you never would have dared to approach on your own. My name is Miles. I'm a graphic designer, which is a convenient way of saying I spend most of my time alone in my apartment, staring at a screen. My apartment was my sanctuary, a place where everything was exactly as I left it. I had my ergonomic chair, my perfectly positioned monitors, and a view of the apartment building across the courtyard. It was a good life, a stable one. But stability can sometimes feel like standing still, and I'd been standing still for a very long time. Let me explain my routine. I'd wake up, make coffee, and sit at my desk by 8. I'd work until lunch, make a sandwich, and maybe watch a bit of a documentary. Then it was back to work until the late afternoon, when the sun would slant across my living room floor. Evenings were for quiet dinners, reading, or sketching in my notebook. It was a cycle of calm that I had mistaken for contentment. The only real variable was the weather and the faces of the people I'd occasionally see on their own balconies. And that's how I first saw Caleb. He moved into the apartment directly next to mine about 3 months before the heat wave. I didn't see the moving truck. I just suddenly became aware of his presence. He was a force of nature on that balcony. Where I would sit quietly with a book, he would be pacing back and forth, talking animatedly on the phone, his laughter echoing in the small space between our buildings. He had this easy confidence that seemed to radiate from him. He was tall, with broad shoulders and strong arms that were often dusted with dirt or flecked with paint at the end of the day. I figured he did some kind of manual labor, construction, or landscaping maybe. He had dark, unruly hair that he was always pushing out of his eyes, and a smile that seemed to start in his eyes long before it reached his lips. He was, in a word, captivating. And in my mind, he was completely, utterly unattainable. He was the kind of guy I was used to admiring from a distance. The kind of guy who probably had a beautiful girlfriend and a big group of loud, happy friends he went out with on weekends. I was the quiet, artistic guy next door who he likely never even noticed. So I watched. From the safety of my living room, through the gap in my blinds, I'd watch him. I'd see him grilling, talking to plants he'd lined up on the railing, or just staring out at the city skyline with a thoughtful expression. Each little glimpse felt like a stolen secret, a piece of a puzzle I would never get to solve. We had a few near interactions. Once, I dropped my keys in the hallway as he was coming out of his apartment. He bent down to pick them up in the same instant I did, and our hands brushed. A jolt, electric and surprising, shot up my arm. "Oh, thanks," I mumbled, my face instantly hot. He just smiled, a small, genuine smile. "No problem, neighbor," he said, his voice deeper than I'd imagined. And that was it. I scurried into my apartment, my heart hammering against my ribs, and leaned against the door. Neighbor. He'd call me neighbor. It was such a simple word, yet it felt like a brand. Another time, the fire alarm went off for a scheduled test. We all had to file out into the courtyard. I saw him standing with a few other people, laughing at something someone said. He caught my eye across the crowd and gave me a little nod, a small acknowledgement of our shared existence. I nodded back, my throat suddenly dry. These were the breadcrumbs I lived on, tiny interactions that I would replay in my mind for days, analyzing them for any hidden meaning, always coming to the same conclusion. He was just being polite. That's what nice, confident people did. It meant nothing. And so, I kept my distance, safe in my quiet world, with him just a wall away. Then came the heat. It started as a whisper, a forecast on the news that everyone dismissed. But then the first day hit, and it was oppressive. The air was thick and heavy, like a wet blanket. The second day was worse. The city's power grid groaned under the strain. And on the morning of the third day, I woke up not to the gentle hum of my air conditioner, but to a deafening silence. I fiddled with the thermostat, I checked the breaker box, but it was no use. The unit was dead. My sanctuary quickly became a prison. The air grew stale and hot. The leather of my desk chair became sticky, and the sun beating through the windows felt malicious. I tried opening the windows, but the air outside was even hotter and thick with the smell of hot asphalt. I called the repair service for my building, and a tired-sounding woman told me they were swamped. The earliest they could get to me was in 3 days. 3 days. It felt like a death sentence. I tried to work, but sweat was dripping from my forehead onto my keyboard. My concentration was shot. By late afternoon, I felt dizzy and defeated. I gave up and went out onto my balcony, hoping for a non-existent breeze. I must have looked as wretched as I felt, slumped in my chair, fanning myself with a magazine. That's when I heard his sliding door open. "You look like you're melting," it was Caleb's voice. I looked over, and he was leaning against his own railing, a glass of iced water in his hand. He was wearing a tank top and shorts, and he looked completely unbothered by the heat. "My AC is on full blast. It's like an ice cave in here." I managed a weak smile. "Mine picked today to die?" Of all the days, I meant it as a simple complaint, a bit of small talk. I wasn't expecting what came next. He took a sip of his water, his eyes thoughtful as he looked at me. "Well, that's no good. You can't stay in there. You'll cook." He paused for a beat, then straightened up. "Hey, why don't you come over here? Seriously, I've got space. You can bring your laptop and work from my kitchen table. There's no point in you suffering next door." I was floored. It was such a simple, kind offer, but it felt monumental. My mind raced. Me? In his apartment? For days? It was terrifying and thrilling all at once. My cautious side, the one that had kept me safe and lonely for so long, screamed at me to say no, to thank him and retreat back into my personal oven. But the heat, the desperation, and a tiny, flickering ember of hope made me hesitate. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to impose." He laughed, that easy, wonderful laugh. "It's not an imposition. It's just an empty table. Come on, grab your stuff. I'll even make you a glass of this." He held up his iced water like a trophy. And just like that, with a simple act of kindness, the wall between our worlds, the one I had so carefully maintained, began to crumble. My carefully ordered life was about to get very, very complicated. Walking those 10 steps from my door to his felt like crossing a continent. I clutched my laptop bag to my chest like a shield, my heart doing a frantic tap dance against my ribs. I was a mess, sweaty and flustered, and I was about to walk into the home of the guy I'd been secretly mooning over for months. "This is a bad idea," a voice in my head chanted. But when he opened the door, a wave of gloriously cold air washed over me, and I knew I couldn't turn back. "Welcome to the Arctic," he said with a grin, stepping aside to let me in. The relief was immediate and profound. His apartment was the mirror image of mine in layout, but the similarity ended there. Where my place was minimalist and neutral, his was warm and lived in. There were stacks of books on the floor, a well-worn guitar leaning against a sofa piled with comfortable-looking throw blankets, and the air smelled faintly of coffee and something clean, like fresh laundry. It smelled like him. He led me to the kitchen table. "Make yourself at home. Seriously, the Wi-Fi password is on the fridge. Bathroom's down the hall. Can I get you that water?" His hospitality was so natural, so effortless, that it slowly began to chip away at my anxiety. I managed a grateful nod, setting up my laptop while he filled a glass with ice and water. He placed it down in front of me, his fingers brushing mine for a fraction of a second. Again, that tiny jolt. But this time, I didn't pull away. The first day was a study in quiet coexistence. He left for work shortly after I got settled, and I had the apartment to myself. It was strange, working in his space, surrounded by his things. I felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. I noticed the small details, a framed photo on the mantelpiece of him with an older couple who had to be his parents, a coffee mug with a chipped rim that was clearly a favorite, a half-finished sketch pad left open on the counter. I resisted the urge to look closer at the drawings, feeling like it would be too much of an intrusion. When he came home that evening, covered in a light sheen of sweat and dust, he brought with him the energy of the outside world. He tossed his keys into a bowl by the door, kicked off his work boots, and smiled when he saw me still at his table. "Survive the day?" he asked. "Thanks to you," I said, and I meant it. "I actually got some work done." "Good. I was thinking pizza tonight. My treat." "You earned it for braving the heat." He didn't even ask if I wanted to. He just assumed we'd be sharing a meal. It felt nice. Normal. We ordered a large pepperoni and sat on his comfortable sofa to eat it, a nature documentary playing quietly on the television. He started telling me about his day, about a difficult client at the landscaping job he worked, and I found myself relaxing completely, laughing at his jokes and telling him about the ridiculous demands of one of my own design clients. It was during that conversation that I saw the first real crack in the confident facade I had built up in my head. I mentioned my own sketching, how it was just a hobby to unwind. His eyes lit up with a surprising intensity. "You draw?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. I nodded, feeling a little shy about it. "Yeah, just, nothing serious." Can I see sometime?" he asked, and there was a note of something in his voice I couldn't place. It wasn't just polite curiosity. It was genuine, almost vulnerable. It was then that my eyes drifted back to the sketch pad on the counter. He followed my gaze, and a faint blush crept up his neck. "Oh, yeah, that's, my stuff." He got up and retrieved it, holding it almost defensively. "It's just a stupid hobby, like you said," but he slowly opened it and turned it around for me to see. I was expecting doodles, maybe some rough landscapes, but the pages were filled with intricate, beautiful portraits of people. Strangers on the subway, an old man sitting on a park bench, a child laughing. They were incredible, full of life and emotion. He had a real, raw talent. "Caleb, these are..." I was speechless. "These are amazing. Seriously." He looked down at the pad, a shy, pleased smile on his face. "You really think so? I like people. Their faces." He explained that the landscaping job was just to pay the bills. His real dream was to be a portrait artist. He'd never told anyone at his job, afraid they'd make fun of him. Suddenly, the confident, extroverted guy I'd been watching from my balcony transformed into someone else. Someone with a secret dream, with insecurities, with a depth I never would have guessed. He wasn't just the hot guy next door anymore. He was Caleb. And my crush, which had been a quiet, manageable thing, started to bloom into something much bigger and more terrifying. Later that evening, after we'd finished the pizza, I was still working at his table, trying to finish a project. The air conditioning was humming along, and I was actually starting to feel a little cold. I must have shivered, because a moment later, a heavy, soft blanket was draped over my shoulders. I looked up in surprise. Caleb was standing behind me, his expression gentle. "You looked cold," he said softly. His hand lingered on my shoulder for a second longer than necessary before he pulled away. The warmth of the blanket was nothing compared to the warmth that spread through my chest. It was such a small thing, a simple, thoughtful gesture. But in the quiet of his apartment, surrounded by the evidence of his hidden life, it felt like everything. It was a moment of pure, unadorned kindness, and it made my carefully guarded heart ache with a hope I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. The second day was different. The initial awkwardness had melted away, replaced by a comfortable domesticity that was both thrilling and terrifying. When I woke up in my own sweltering apartment and crossed the hall, he was already there, making coffee. He handed me a mug without a word, a silent understanding passing between us. We were falling into a rhythm, a temporary life shared between our two apartments. That evening, the heat finally began to break. A cool front was moving in, and for the first time in days, the air outside didn't feel like a furnace. After we ate dinner, this time, something I insisted on cooking as a thank you, Caleb suggested we sit out on his balcony. "Might actually be a breeze," he said. His balcony was just like mine, a simple concrete slab with a metal railing, but it felt like a different world. It was our space now, not just his. The city was spread out before us, a tapestry of glittering lights under a darkening purple sky. The oppressive silence of the heat had been replaced by the familiar hum of traffic and life below. We sat in the two chairs he had, not saying much at first, just enjoying the shift in the atmosphere. He talked more about his art, telling me about a class he was taking at a community college, his voice full of a quiet passion that was intoxicating. I found myself opening up in return, talking about my own abandoned dreams of being an illustrator and why I'd chosen the safer path of graphic design. There were no barriers between us out here. It was just two people sharing secrets under the stars. The air grew cooler as the night deepened. I could feel the goosebumps rising on my arms, but I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want the evening to end. I felt suspended in this perfect moment, a fragile bubble of connection that I was afraid to pop. I think he felt it too. The easy conversation dwindled, replaced by a comfortable silence, thick with unspoken things. After a while, he stretched and stood up. "Getting a little chilly," he said, his voice quiet. I thought he was going to suggest we go inside, and my heart sank. This was it. The bubble was about to burst. I nodded, starting to gather my resolve to stand up and end the night. But he didn't go inside. He walked to the large sliding glass door that led into his living room and pulled it almost completely shut, leaving only a small gap. The sound of the city instantly muted, and the world seemed to shrink, containing just the two of us in the soft glow of the light filtering from his apartment. He had created a pocket of privacy, a small, intimate stage on the edge of the world. Then he turned. He didn't go back to his chair. Instead, he took the 2 steps that separated us and stood right in front of me, leaning his back against the cool glass of the door. My breath caught in my throat. He was so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, see the faint flicker of the city lights reflected in his dark eyes. He was close enough that if I just leaned forward a few inches, our chests would touch. My heart was pounding a frantic, deafening rhythm against my ribs. The world narrowed to the space between us. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me. It wasn't a casual glance. It was a gaze of profound, unnerving intensity. It was questioning, searching, as if he was trying to read all the secrets I had hidden away. In his eyes, I saw a mirror of my own hopeful, terrified confusion. He raised a hand, slowly, as if not to startle me. He pointed up at the sky. "That one there," he said, his voice a low murmur that seemed to vibrate through me. "That's Cassiopeia. It looks like a W." His arm was right next to my head, his fingers just inches from my cheek. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap. I wasn't looking at the stars. I was looking at him. He slowly lowered his arm, his gaze never leaving mine. The air was thick, charged with a current of pure electricity. This was it. This was the turning point. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't even a touch. It was a question asked without words. It was a deliberate closing of a door, a calculated step closer, a shared moment of breathtaking, terrifying stillness. And in that silence on the balcony, with the city humming obliviously below us, everything changed. I had no idea what to do or say next, but I knew, with absolute certainty, that we could never go back to being just neighbors. He eventually broke the spell. He cleared his throat softly and took a small step back, giving me room to breathe again. "Well," he said, his voice a little rough, "we should probably get inside." The moment was over, but the echo of it remained, hanging in the air between us like a ghost. I could only nod, my limbs feeling heavy and uncooperative. The walk back into his living room was the most awkward journey of my life. The easy camaraderie we had built over the last 2 days was gone, shattered by that single, charged moment on the balcony. We avoided looking at each other. He busied himself with turning off a lamp, and I gathered my phone and the book I'd brought out with me, my hands trembling slightly. "The repair guy is coming for my AC tomorrow morning," I said into the silence, the words sounding loud and clumsy. "So, I guess I'll be out of your hair." I was trying to sound casual, but my voice was tight with emotion. "Oh," he said, turning to face me, but his eyes were fixed on a spot on the floor just past my shoulder. "Right. Good. That's good." There was a chasm between us now, miles wide. A few minutes ago, I could feel his body heat. Now, we might as well have been in separate rooms. The tension was unbearable. "Well, thanks again. For everything," I stammered, backing towards the door. "Good night, Caleb." "Night, Miles," he said, his voice quiet. I fled his apartment, escaping into the hallway and fumbling for my keys. Once safely inside my own place, I leaned against the door, my entire body shaking. The heat of my apartment, which had been so unbearable before, was nothing compared to the confusing firestorm in my mind. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay in my bed, replaying the scene on the balcony over and over again. It was a film loop in my head. The slide of the door shutting, the way he stepped close, the look in his eyes, the feeling of his proximity, so intense it was almost a physical touch. What did it mean? My mind became a battleground between hope and fear. The hopeful side, the one that had been starved for so long, insisted it was a clear signal. You don't create an intimate, private space like that with someone by accident. You don't look at a person the way he looked at me unless you feel something. He was testing the waters, seeing how I would react. He was showing me he was interested without having to risk the words. That gesture was for me. It had to be. But then the fear would rush in, cold and sharp, drowning everything else. What if I was just projecting my own feelings onto him? What if he was just being friendly, maybe a little overly familiar, because we'd spent so much time together? Maybe he's just a physically close person. Maybe he closed the door because he was genuinely cold. I was the quiet, nerdy guy next door. He was Caleb. I was building a fantasy out of a simple, meaningless gesture. I was setting myself up for monumental humiliation. I imagined the next morning. I'd have to see him when I went to retrieve my laptop. Would we acknowledge it? Or would we pretend it never happened? The thought of facing him filled me with a paralyzing dread. I dissected every moment of the last 2 days. The way he'd offered me the blanket, the way he'd been so interested in my sketching. Were those clues? Or was I just a lonely person seeing signs that weren't there? Isn't that what lonely people do? I tossed and turned, the sheets tangling around me. The silence of my apartment was no longer peaceful, it was accusatory. It felt like it was mocking my foolishness. I had been perfectly fine in my predictable little world. Why did I have to go and let this sliver of hope in? Hope was dangerous. It was the precursor to disappointment. I had let my guard down for a moment, and now I was paying the price, trapped in a spiral of my own making. By the time the sun started to creep through my blinds, I had analyzed, second-guessed, and tortured myself into a state of pure exhaustion. I had come to a miserable conclusion. I had to assume I'd imagined it all. It was the only way to protect myself. I would go over there, get my things, thank him politely, and retreat back to my side of the wall, where I belonged. The experiment was over. The repairman arrived early, a cheerful, efficient man who had my air conditioner humming again in under an hour. The cool air began to fill my apartment, a bittersweet relief. There was no more excuse. I had to go over there. I stood in my hallway for a full 5 minutes, taking deep breaths, rehearsing my lines. Thanks so much. The AC is fixed. I'll grab my stuff now. Simple. Polite. Impersonal. Finally, I forced myself to knock on his door. When he opened it, the awkwardness from the night before came rushing back, tenfold. He was wearing workout clothes, his hair still damp, maybe from a morning run. He looked tired. "Hey," he said, his voice strained. "Your AC? All fixed," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "Just came to get my laptop." "I really can't thank you enough, Caleb. You were a lifesaver." I tried to move past him into the apartment, intending to make this as quick as possible. But he didn't move. He stood in the doorway, blocking my path. "Miles," he said, and his voice was so serious it stopped me cold. "Wait, can we talk for a second?" My heart plummeted into my stomach. This was it, the moment of truth. He was going to let me down easy, apologize if he gave me the wrong impression, and send me on my way. I braced myself for the impact. Sure," I managed to say, my throat closing up. He stepped back, letting me into the living room, and closed the door behind us. The click of the latch sounded like a gavel. He ran a hand through his damp hair, a gesture I was beginning to realize meant he was nervous. He wouldn't look at me. "Look," he started, his eyes on the floor. "About last night, on the balcony. I think I made things weird. I'm sorry." There it was. The apology. A cold wave of disappointment washed over me, so intense it made me feel dizzy. But it was mixed with a strange kind of relief. At least now I knew. I could stop wondering. "It's fine," I said, my voice coming out flat and lifeless. "Don't worry about it." But he shook his head, finally lifting his eyes to meet mine. They were filled with a desperate, frustrated energy. "No, it's not fine. That's not what I mean. I'm not sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for how I did it. I'm sorry because I freaked out and left you hanging." I just stared at him, my brain struggling to process his words. What was he saying? He took a deep breath, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Miles, this whole week, me inviting you over, it wasn't just about the heat. I mean, it was, but it was also an excuse. The truth is, I've been trying to work up the nerve to talk to you for months." The world tilted on its axis. He continued, his voice earnest and raw. "I'd see you out on your balcony, or in the hall. You have this quiet, calm energy about you. I wanted to get to know you, but I had no idea how. I kept thinking, what would I even say? And I was scared, you know? I thought, well, I didn't know if you were interested. So when I saw you looking so miserable in the heat, I just thought, this is it. This is my chance." It was a stupid, cowardly way to do it, I know. He looked at me, his expression pleading. "And last night, On the balcony. That was me trying to show you. I was trying to say everything without saying anything, because I was still too much of a coward to just ask. And then I panicked. I've never been good at this. I couldn't speak. A tidal wave of emotion was crashing over me. Shock, disbelief, and a joy so profound it was almost painful. All my anxieties, all my overthinking, all the scenarios I'd built up in my head where I was the fool, they all evaporated in an instant. He had been just as nervous, just as uncertain as I was. You were. I finally whispered, the words feeling inadequate. He nodded, a look of immense relief on his face as he saw my expression. God, yes. I've been driving myself crazy. He took a tentative step closer, bridging the gap between us. Miles, I really like you. And I was hoping you might feel the same way. The hope that I had tried so hard to crush blossomed into a brilliant, radiant certainty. I smiled, a real, genuine smile that I could feel all the way to my soul. Caleb, I said, my voice finally steady. I really like you too. The tension that had been stretched so tight between us finally snapped. He closed the remaining distance in a single step, and his hands came up to cup my face, his touch gentle but firm. And then he kissed me. It wasn't tentative or questioning like the moment on the balcony. It was a kiss of pure, unadulterated relief. It was confident and sure, a confirmation of everything we had both been too afraid to say. It was the end of the wondering and the beginning of everything else. In the weeks that followed, my life transformed. The quiet, predictable routine I had known was replaced by something vibrant and new. My apartment no longer felt like a solitary sanctuary. It felt like a home base I returned to after adventures. And there were so many adventures. Our first real date was at a small, crowded Italian restaurant that Caleb loved. We sat for hours, talking and laughing, the candlelight flickering between us. He told me more about his family, his childhood, his dream of having his own art studio one day. I told him about the fantasy novels I secretly wanted to illustrate, a dream I hadn't spoken aloud to anyone before. Sharing these parts of ourselves felt as intimate as any kiss. He took me to see his secret spot in the city, a tiny, hidden park overlooking the river. We went to art galleries, and I watched, fascinated, as he would stand before a painting, his eyes tracing every brushstroke, his passion for art so palpable it was contagious. I, in turn, showed him my world. He'd sit on the arm of my chair while I worked, watching me bring a design to life on the screen, asking questions with a genuine curiosity that made my mundane work feel exciting. The wall that had once separated our apartments, our lives, completely dissolved. His door was always open to me, and mine to him. We'd cook dinner together, our movements falling into an easy, familiar dance in my small kitchen. We'd watch movies piled on his comfortable sofa, the same one where we'd first shared a pizza. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by a deep and growing comfort, a sense of rightness that settled deep in my bones. He wasn't the unattainable guy next door anymore. He was Caleb, the man who knew my coffee order, who loved the way I laughed, who held my hand as we walked down the street. A few months after that fateful heat wave, we found ourselves back out on his balcony. It was a cool autumn evening, the air crisp and clean. The city lights glittered below us, just as they had that first night, but everything was different. I was different. I stood leaning back against his chest, his arms wrapped securely around me, his chin resting on top of my head. It was our spot now, a place of beginnings. You know, I said softly, looking out at the skyline. I was so terrified that night. After you closed the door, I felt him chuckle, the vibration running through me. You have no idea, he murmured into my hair. I went inside and basically paced a trench in my floor for 3 hours. I was convinced I'd blown it completely. I turned in his arms to face him, smiling. Thank God for broken air conditioners. He smiled back, his eyes full of a warmth that had become my favorite thing in the world. Thank God for brave neighbors who are willing to take a chance on a weirdo artist who has to manufacture an emergency just to talk to them. He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, gentle kiss that felt like coming home. I used to believe that life was something you had to carefully manage and control, that safety was found in routine and predictability. I thought my little world, with its invisible walls, was keeping me safe. But I was wrong. It was just keeping me lonely. Sometimes, You don't even realize you're living in a cage until someone comes along and hands you the key. You can live just a few feet away from everything you've ever wanted and not even know it. It turns out, the most profound changes in your life don't always come from grand plans. Sometimes they start with a simple, unexpected offer, a shared pizza, and the courage to step out onto a balcony and see what happens next.